I want to welcome everyone to our third and final webinar on engaging students, learning by doing, and will be presented once again, by Dr. Todd Hamrick. Dr. Hamrick is a teaching assistant professor in the Fundamentals of Engineering program.
All right, thank you very much, John. Thank everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for joining. Looks like we have a pretty good number of people. I believe you can post questions in the questions. There's a questions tab over there on your dashboard, and I would encourage you to post questions. And I've got a couple of things along the way. We'll try to be at least a little bit interactive here. So go ahead and start with this. I am teaching associate professor in the freshman engineering program at Statler College, and we're going to be talking about experiential learning, strategies for engaging students. I'll give you a short outline here. We'll have a fairly short presentation, maybe 15-20 minutes, and you're welcome to post questions anytime during that. There will be a recording of this webinar available from Teaching and Learning Commons. We also have two previous webinars. There was one on handling large classes and another one on doing group work if you're interested in either of those. We'll do a short bio of me, then talk about some of the benefits of experiential learning and then how to implement experiential learning inside and outside of the classroom. Everything we do won't apply to you, but hopefully you'll get a couple of nuggets that you can use. I would also be interested in what classes you are teaching or thinking about this for, so that it helps a little bit maybe with some of the interaction and answering some of your questions. And so you can post those. I think you can post them in questions but not chat. So who is this guy? If I was you, I'd be asking, who is this guy, and does he have any idea what he's talking about? I did graduate from WVU in 1987. I have degrees in mechanical engineering and a degree in German. I worked for more than 20 years in industry, mostly in the plastics industry, making durable goods, things like plastic products for cars, for lawn and garden, for HVAC industries, things of that nature. I came back to WVU in 2005 because I really wanted to teach, and I got my master's and then my PhD. I'm now starting my 7th year here in freshman engineering. Primarily, I teach Engineering 101 and 102, and I also do study abroad, and I'll occasionally teach some other things as well. I won a couple of teaching awards, and my focus is really on experiential learning and kinesthetic learning. My sort of overall teaching philosophy is to teach beyond the book. What's the benefit of experiential learning? And so I know a lot of people, when you do these webinars, you're listening while you're doing something else, and I want you to indulge me for just 1 minute. Get out a sheet of just scrap paper, any kind of just scrap paper that you're not going to use for anything else, and I want to do something with this piece of paper. So we're going to take a sheet of paper. We're going to fold it with the short side along the long side, so it makes a kind of triangle with a tail on it. So if you'll just give me 1 minute of your time and follow along here, and do this with me, please. So you should have a triangle with a tail on it. Then we're going to fold that triangle again, so it makes a smaller triangle that still has that same tail. So you take the little triangle and then you fold it again, and now you've got a triangle that looks like this, and with this about a 2-inch long tail on it. So you have something that looks kind of like this. I'm going to put this down so I can see my own webcams. All right, so you should have something that looks kind of like this. Now you're going to fold this one more time. Fold it over. You've got one side that's just smooth on the back, and then the other side that has all of the folds. You're going to fold it over so that you cover those folds. And so now you have something that starts to look like a little boat. And you got one side has the opening, and the other side is just a crease. You can take the tail that's over that little crease and fold it over. And if you want, you can put a little piece of tape on that, but you don't have to. And then that last one, you go ahead and fold over again, and then you take those two that are open, and you can open that, shove that little piece in, and you can tape that in there also if you like, and you can open that up, and you've got yourself a little cup. You got yourself a little sort of funnel that you can put treats in there. You can put candy corn in there at Halloween. You can, it won't hold any liquids, but you can put all kinds of, you can put nuts in there. In fact, I've seen them like this where you can fold this over and tape it, and then you can actually buy things on the street in some cities, almonds and things like that. So it's just a little thing that you can make. Why would we do that? You see, I could explain this to you. I could show you a demonstration of it, but if I have you actually pick up a piece of paper and do it, you'll learn it. If somebody asks you to do something like that next week, then you would probably be able to actually do it, and you'd know how it works and why, and maybe how you could modify it a little bit to make it a little better, a little bigger, smaller, and so you understand it better by actually doing it. That's really the benefit. The whole idea of the sage on the stage really is gone anymore. It is tempting to lecture, especially when you have large classes. You've got a huge number of people you're trying to talk to, but humans don't really learn that way very well. We tend to learn a lot better by actually doing things. And so I can demonstrate it, I can tell you about it, but if you pick up the thing and actually do it, you tend to learn it a whole lot better. So experiential learning, it promotes engagement with the material, it promotes more inquiry, and it promotes a lot more purpose. You learn to apply the theory by doing, and it really helps with critical thinking. We want our students to understand critical thinking, but we have a tendency not to teach critical thinking very much. And so it's really important when people experience things, then they're able to understand why a little better. And this is really one of the better ways, in my estimation, to teach critical thinking. So don't just stand there, do something. It is tempting to lecture, but what happens is you're not really teaching. What you're really doing when you're lecturing is presenting. And to some extent, your students become kind of an audience. And sometimes that's the right way to present information. And so I'm not saying we should never lecture. I do, and all of us do, and sometimes that's the right way to convey information, but it really can't be our only tool. And I guess that's really what I'm about here, is that there's more than one way to do something. And so if you want deeper understanding, you need to teach it deeper. So is this hard to implement? Yeah, sometimes it is. These experiences can be really big things. You can do field trips, study abroad. The picture that you're seeing here is in Munich, Germany. I've been doing that for 4 years. I'll be doing it again at spring break. It'll be 5 years in a row. You can do labs. You can do internships and co-ops. You can redesign your courses, and it can be hard to implement. I'll show you a little short video here. What you're looking at is kind of the culmination. Let me see if I can turn that down. What you're seeing here is the culmination of a group of 3 students working together for about a half a semester on these little robots. And I'm not teaching robotics, I'm teaching programming. And so they kind of set all this up themselves. And so this is the way to teach MATLAB programming. I could teach it using something that's entirely computational, but the students seem to get an awful lot out of something that they can actually design and build and do. And so that's why I do it that way. You might have seen something like this where you have these learning cycles, and you've got concrete experience, and then reflective, and then conceptualization, and more of that. And this is good. This works. It's effective. And in a formalized environment, you can do that. But you don't necessarily have to be quite so formal. It doesn't have to be quite that hard. You can incorporate small experiences into the classroom. Anything that has an experience and then some sort of reflection and conceptualization. Why did it work that way? How did it work that way? And what can we do to make it better, different, to change it? And if we make that change, what are the effects? Then that's really experiential learning, and it doesn't have to be quite so formal. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. So experiences can be kind of small things. Typically, I like to break the class up into 2 or 3 pieces. For a 50-minute lecture, I like to split it into about a 20-30 split, 25-25. And that's not a hard and fast rule. And sometimes I'll lecture for 30 minutes and have a 20-minute activity, and sometimes I'll lecture for 20 minutes and have a longer activity. For an hour and 15-minute class, I usually try to break it into 2 or 3 things, and sometimes I'll just have a short 15-minute activity in the middle of it. But if you are, it's really good to alternate a lecture with an activity, because if you are lecturing for over an hour, you tend to lose your students after about 30 minutes. And what that might require is a little bit of a partial flip of your teaching, and by flipping the classroom, the sort of standard flipped classroom is when they do all of their reading outside of the classroom, and then the only thing you're doing in class is activities and interaction and project work. Fully flipped classrooms like that are difficult to implement, and there's some research that says that maybe they're not the greatest way to do it. But a little bit of back and forth on that is okay, because if you find that you're having to spend a huge amount of time just covering material, then you might be able to take some of that material and have it outside of classroom from the book. You've got good materials that you ask the students to read, and it's sometimes hard to get them to pry open the book. But if they're required to in order to come in and really fully understand the material, then you tend to get better efficacy on that. And then you find out how to use the concepts in class and not necessarily presenting on the fundamentals of them. And a good way to do that is pick some of those really good homework problems, the ones that you want them to learn and understand, and the ones that you want them to interact with and really get something on, and have them work that problem in class, and not work it on the board, but helping each other with it. You put the problem up on the board and maybe the first step of it, and then let them get started and work on it in the class. I like to have them help each other, break into small groups. They may or may not be their project groups if I'm doing a project-based class, but get them started on something and then let them finish at home. Maybe you can finish it up there in class. Let me give you an example of a way that I do this, and this is just one of 10 million ways that you could do it. We teach a course that has a design process, so we explain what the design process is, and then have them tackle the problem. So here's the design process. It's a 5-step process, and we talk about what goes into each of those steps, and then I give them a case study on how other people have solved this problem before using this step, and then do that for 20, 25-minute lecture, maybe 30, and then I give them a problem to solve. I don't give it to them as a homework problem. We work it in class. So I ask them to apply this 5-step process to a particular design challenge. Here's just one I did was design a way to bring fresh fruits and vegetables home from the grocery store that is more environmentally friendly than taking a plastic bag and putting it inside of a plastic bag. There's something wrong with what we're doing. Can we make this more environmentally friendly and not damage the goods? So I let them work on that problem using this 5-step process, and we could change that up every semester, and I usually do, but just come up with some new thing, just some new nut for them to chew on. And this is just one example of how they gain experiences using the material in a guided setting, and that's really a great way for them to experience. This isn't difficult, it doesn't take a huge amount of time, and it's not expensive. So some of these things don't necessarily have to be long, involved, and expensive. We also do a lot of sort of follow me techniques. We have computer-based classrooms. We're teaching MATLAB, Excel, and CAD, and so there's a lot of, I'll do it and then you follow along, and then I'll kind of bounce out into the classroom. Or if I'm lucky enough to have a TA, I usually don't, but if I'm lucky enough to have a TA, I can have my TA go around and help other people. And so in engineering, I could have them draw a bracket or a linkage, but rather than something that they've never actually seen or interacted with, I had them draw a s'more. So have them draw something that they're familiar with, maybe from their personal lives, and besides, it's a little bit fun, and rather than just some boring nut or bolt, I have them draw something that is interesting. And I like to do a lot of these sort of object at hand type of activities, and it could be almost any object. It could be a shoe, a crayon, a book, a teacup, a t-shirt. It kind of doesn't matter what the object is. And then depending on what you're doing, you can teach, if you're teaching a descriptive writing class, have them describe it. Now you could picture a t-shirt, but if you actually give them one, they can feel it, they can feel the texture, they can feel how soft or stiff it is, they can smell it. And these are things that come into the brain, and then they're able to bring them back out a whole lot better than simply picture this in your mind and then write about it. It could be design this thing, make a better design, make it, improve on it, market it, or sell it if you're teaching a business class. What are the societal impacts of this? You could take a whole history class just on cotton and the societal impacts of that, and what happened with the cotton gin, and how that affected society and industry. And so there, almost anything that you do, you can find some object that's associated with what you teach, and talk about all of those things. If it's, say, geology, you can bring in a particular type of rock, and then there are societal impacts that go along with the minerals that are associated with pretty much everything on the planet. And so there are things that you can bring into those. So these are some small in the classroom type things that aren't necessarily expensive or elaborate, but it helps the students interact with the material. We also do a lot of project-based learning, kinesthetic type stuff, teamwork, and this really benefits us with critical thinking. This is another example of some of the robots that I use. And again, I'm not teaching a robotics course. I'm teaching a course in programming, but I use robots, and they program the robots to do things that they want. We use a lot of other project-based type stuff where they actually build things and design things. And then we have a big expo at the end of the year, and ours is this year is going to be on December 6th. I'd invite you up to engineering that evening to come up and see some of the projects that our first-year engineering students design and build, and you can see some of these things. It'll be at an engineering sciences building, ground floor. You can't miss it. There will be 1,000 freshmen here doing presentations that evening. So. Come on up, and you can see the type of stuff that we do, and we really find that they understand the critical thinking significantly better by doing these projects, but it really helps if we give them some of those interim things in between, because we've done it both ways, where we said, here's the process, and now go use it. And then we've also done it where we say, here's the process, and let me guide you a little bit, and then apply it to this big thing. And that three-step process tends to do a whole lot better if they have some instruction and use in the middle. Some of the things that you can do too is some individual homework. Or it can be group homework where they are going to go to some place and collect some data, do some observations, collect some measurements, and then use that for something. Some of the things that we've done in the past is have them do some estimates, but they have to go and actually see something and collect some measurements off of that. But if you're teaching something that maybe is more in the way of art, you would go to a building and look at the architectural art that's built into the building, and why did they do it that way, and how did they make that, and how did that get through the approval process? Because you really need to have some kind of meaning or theory behind it. If they are just doing it, then and not really seeing how the activity fits in with the theory, then you're kind of missing that connection, and it's a really important connection to be able to make that that shows how what they're doing fits in with the theory that you're learning. And that really is the critical thinking part of it. And reflection papers are a good way to go on that. I don't use reflection papers so much in my engineering courses, but I do in my study abroad. So it's another tool. So that's what I have in terms of in terms of presentation. I would ask you to write a short minute paper. What did you get from this? Did you gain anything from this? Put that in the questions or the chat, whichever you have available to you there. And we'll go back and read those, and there will be a recording of this from Teaching and Learning Commons. So I'm going to bring the webcam back up now and see what questions you guys have.
It did ask if you could share your PowerPoints. Maybe if you could
Yes,
send all three, we'll send out the whole set with all the links to the webinars.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I'll share them with John, and then he can share them with everybody.
Okay. Lucinda Potter says, I like the idea of starting an assignment in class and then finishing it at home as homework.
Yeah, I do that a good bit, especially when I have kind of a bigger problem, and I'll have them. That is a bigger problem for them to solve. I'll kind of get them started, and then have them bring it in the next class finished.
Okay. And Lindsay Reinhardt asked if you could talk about some of your methods for reflection.
Okay, the main thing that I use with reflections is in my study abroad. And so in the study abroad, they have to write they have to keep a journal. And so necessarily that's going to be in chronological order because, on day one we did this and on day two we did that. And I asked them some specific things in there, not just what did you do, but to comment on sort of a list of things. What did you think? What did you feel? Were you prepared by the coursework that we did ahead of time? What did it smell like? Those types of things. And then what I ask them to do in the reflection paper is to go back through it the other way. And not in chronological order, but what were the cultural sites that we visited? What were the factories that we visited? What were the research sites that we visited? And then talk about those in more of a topical type of setting or the that type of topic by subject matter, I guess. And that tends to bring out more of those, well, I felt this way about this kind of an activity, and I felt a different way about a different activity. Or maybe I felt the same way about it, and it helps them to kind of solidify that a little bit. So that's the way I use reflections. But it's a good idea to give them some starting points, some hints as the kind of thing that you want them to talk about. And so it's really important to have some things for them to talk about in there, because if you just say reflect on, they don't really know what that means. So it's a good idea to kind of define what it is you're looking for in the reflection. And I have even a rubric on that that shows the kinds of things that I'm looking for.
Okay. Lindsay, did that answer your question, or do you have a follow-up question?
I think that's helpful. I work with service learning across disciplines, and reflection is obviously an important part of that. So I'm just happy to kind of hear about how you're doing that. So that's helpful, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I'd be happy to talk to you about it a little bit more. I know that if you're doing study abroad, you're doing reflections. Everybody does reflection papers with that. I know that Adventure West Virginia does a lot as well.
I do have a question about balancing workload. And I'm not sure if you have a good answer for this, but I struggle with, so like you had mentioned, I already am flipping, like kind of half flipping my class where I have recorded lectures that are boring for me to give, so I can record them ahead of time, have the students listen to them, and then we do case study work. I teach over in MedLab Science. And so we do case study work together in class, some mock quizzes in class, and I already with that deal with complaints of there's too much work for this course.
Yeah,
Yet,
we get that a lot. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so and then you are on top of that have also projects that are being done.
Yes.
And I've taken a lot of what like you suggested, taken a lot of the homework and had them do it in class. So those great homework problems, having them doing it in class either together or in groups where we talk about it at the time that they're doing it. So that has seemed to help, but getting them to buy in with the amount of work that comes along with it, I'm having trouble with.
Yeah, we get that complaint a lot, and our dean is completely unsympathetic. It's been and even when I've advocated for my students, when I think it's an awful lot of work too, it's been sort of, yes, it is. And that's kind of my answer to that. Is I get that complaint a lot, that it's a lot of work, especially one of our courses is a 2-hour class, and there's a huge amount of work into it. And the answer is yes, it is, and you're going to have to do it. I even find sometimes that they cherry pick stuff. They'll say, well, I'm just not doing that. It's just not worth the effort. And so one of the things that helps is if they know ahead of time what work is going to be involved. If I just say, here's an assignment, and then here's the next one, here's the next one, then, and especially for out of class work, they really don't like it. So some of the things that have helped, at least in terms of organization, is give them a list ahead of time of all of the assignments that they're going to have to do and the due dates of them. And the second thing on that is if they have fairly consistent due dates, if everything is due on Monday night, then there's a certain consistency that, okay, I've got to put stuff in on Monday nights, or maybe you want it 2 days a week, that it's going to be, the night before class, if it's a Tuesday, Thursday class, I'm going to have Monday and Wednesday assignments due. You can kind of pick that, but if you're consistent with it, then they tend to complain a little less because there's a lot less chasing around of the due dates. And so those are a couple of things that you can do, but in terms of complaints about there being a lot of work, I think that that those complaints are going to continue. And I think if you cut the work in half, you'd still get complaints that it's too much work.
Fair enough.
Maybe you'd have fewer complaints, but you probably would.
We have April McGinnis ask about where she can find information about organizing field trips for her classes, what campus policies or procedures, processes should she be aware of?
I actually haven't done a lot of field trips personally. I know people do them, and I'm looking at doing one with our learning. We've got an LLC, a Live Learn community. They have done some. It tends to be kind of expensive to do a bus, but you're going to want to take them by bus. And in terms of, although I found a bus company called, oh shoot, the name escapes me. Red Carpet, maybe, up in Pennsylvania. And they'll come down, even though they're up above Uniontown someplace. They'll come down here, and that's who I use to take. I think it's called Red Carpet Limousine. They will take us up to Pittsburgh, and they take a group of 14 people to Pittsburgh for about $330, which I think is not too bad. So you can get them for part of a day for that. In terms of finding field trips, it really depends. You need to use your industry or local contacts for that. I know somebody who, in fact, the one that I'm planning to organize, invited us. He said, hey, I've got this thing and you might be interested. And it's where they make drywall, which sounds really boring, but to engineers, it could be really kind of interesting about, how do they make drywall? I've seen it on TV, and it's they've got this miles long oven that they put drywall through, and who knew? So anyway, there's so it kind of depends on I'm afraid I don't have a real good answer for you, other than to say that you need to use your local contacts and people that you know. And I'm kind of a local guy, so if I can help you with anything, just contact me, and I'll try to help you. And if I don't know, I'll try to put you in touch with somebody who does. Depends on the kind of field trip you want to do. But Pittsburgh's only an hour and a half away, and it's a pretty good sized city, and they've got all kinds of stuff up there. Now there is one exception. I do one of the things I do is this art and engineering, you can see the latest sculpture that was built by that in the second floor of the Evansdale Library right now. And we've done a field trip to Pittsburgh with that pretty much every year. But it's a small group. We're able to fit everybody in a minivan. Like a 15-passenger van, and then somebody from the school who's certified to do that drives them. I would not recommend just getting them in the car and driving them yourself. I would not recommend doing that. I think that you should go through a bus company or somebody who's certified to do that kind of thing.
No, that's great. I've been curious about that for a while. I'm thinking more locally, like around Morgantown.
Okay.
But it's just something I wasn't sure, like in terms of university policies and waivers and stuff like that, like what hoops I would need to jump
They've actually
through.
made that easier. A couple of years ago, you used to have to be, if you were going to drive any students anywhere, you had to go through certain training, but they eliminated that as part of the sort of reduction in paperwork that they've been doing over the last couple of years. So I don't think you have to, but generally I'm not comfortable doing that. So I usually don't drive them myself, although I do when I do the study abroad in Europe, because there's just no other way. What do you teach?
I teach literature, so they're pretty big classes.
Okay. And what types of things are you wanting to take them to see?
I'm doing environmental lit, and so one of the things I thought about doing was we're doing a unit on plants, second part of the semester. This obviously isn't going to work for this semester, but I'm kind of thinking ahead to future semesters. But like a trip to the Botanic Gardens or somewhere to kind of explore, kind of in the setting of whatever our topic is for that unit.
I'm sorry, about how many do you think you would take at a time?
I mean, my classes are 44, so when I was
that's a
thinking
busload.
trip, I guess I was
Okay, but that's one
yeah.
busload. That's not actually all that crazy. And I'll tell you, I might be able to put you in touch with somebody. I don't know them personally, but my daughter is studying geology, and she does field trips all the time with them. And they're kind of local field trips and stuff. So what you're talking about there is very much like what the geology department is doing. And they go out. I know that they've gone out to look at some acid mine drainage remediation and some of that kind of stuff recently. So if you contact me offline, I will try to get you in touch with the right people there, and that can answer that question a little better than I can.
All right, let's see. The next question is from Natalia. How to make sure students read the materials, it seems to be in relation to the flipped approach at home, so practice can actually happen in class.
Well, I do a lot of quizzes, and in fact, we've had academic dishonesty issues, and that's probably a different webinar all on its own. But one of the things that, when we've done some studies on that here in our own department, and one of the things that we came up with that is that any work that they do at home is automatically group work. And if you want the homework to be individual, then they're just gonna work on it in groups, or they're gonna get it off of a website or have somebody do it. So I collect very little homework, and I do a lot more quizzes. So you can do really short quizzes in class, and that does two things. One is it's attendance, and the other is that's kind of how you can hold them accountable. You're going to have a short quiz, and it doesn't have to be a long one. A 5 to 10 minute quiz is enough to make them do the work that they feel that it's worthwhile. And you can do those in eCampus, and they can be auto graded. So once you've set it up, it automatically goes into the grade book, and it's a pretty easy way to do that. So so that's one kind of easy way to hold them accountable, is to have a lot of at least once. I have probably a quiz once a week, maybe not every single week, but I have quizzes in my class pretty much every week, and that's one of the main reasons for that, is to hold them accountable and make sure they're actually doing the work.
Okay, we have a request to share the reflection rubric. Can we send that out
Sure.
with the PowerPoint?
I can do that, yes.
Okay.
It's pretty simple, but basically it says, for minimum, you you've got to at least hit these points, and then for really for middle of the road work it's this, and for excellent work it's this. This is what I'm looking for, and in about 3 topics. So it's a pretty simple rectangular table type matrix. So I will be happy to send that to John.
Okay, thank you, Todd. Adrian Williams asks if you have any suggestions on approaches for experiential learning of concepts or physical objects that cannot be directly observed or interacted with, for example, cells and molecules.
Well, let me think about that. How would you interact with cells and molecules? Well, you can see them under the microscope, and so a lab type environment would help with that. And the other thing is when you have lots of them, then you are able to make something out of that. So if I'm looking at the first thing that pops in my head is algae, and what can I do with algae? Algae can be a real problem. It can also be something that we might be able to start making fuel out of at some point. And so some of these things are a little harder to kind of put your hands on, and some of them you actually don't want to put your hands on because it might hurt you. So things like that.
Yeah, I think, can I just intercede?
Yeah.
I think maybe that's where we look at maybe some simulations. There are a lot of really nice, computer-based simulations out there that may provide your students with a, it's one step removed from a direct experience, but some of them are quite good.
Yeah, I also was in a class one time where we were working on how crystal structures grow inside of solids, like steel is crystalline, and there are a lot of different types of crystal structures. And the instructor brought in different colors of Play-Doh, and we would put the different structures together inside of the Play-Doh, and then you could slice down through it so you could see what it looked like in 2 dimensions. So that was kind of an interactive way to do something like that. You might be able to do something along that line.
Okay, Marian, you had something to add about accountability in a flipped classroom. I turned your mic on.
Yes, but if I can even weigh in on what he's saying, I would also imagine for things that are so small like cells, you could model and use models like water. Like if you're trying to talk about the cell membrane, then you can do a model with an oil-water emulsion and how flexible that is with the oil bubbles that are within the water. But with the flipped classroom, because I have been doing that and I've had a good amount of success with assigning at the end of the reading and or lecture that they're listening to at home, assigning quizzes online. The way I've been able to deal with some of the complaints with that is to give them 3 attempts at the quiz. They don't get the answers, they just get their scores right and wrong, so they have to go back and look up the information they missed. And then I make the questions essentially the major essential information they're going to need for problem solving in the next class.
Yeah.
So I make them very targeted to those assignments. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. Really super suggestion. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So, Marianne, you were also asking about whether the TLC had any resources for transporting students, and not that I'm aware of, but I can check on that and let you know. You were saying that you found it difficult. So I think maybe in the same fashion, Todd, if you could share some information with Marion as well as April, that would be appreciated.
I'm thinking since now 3 of us have weighed in that we're having trouble finding ways to transport people places, then it might be something that the university is missing. Hey, instructors want this information, so we need to have it in a more accessible form.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know people who do that, so I can find out from them. I don't do it myself, but I know people who do.
Okay, and I can bring that to our leadership group to say, this was an issue that was raised in one of the webinars, and ask whether anyone knows of anything, or how that might be resolved if it is the case where the information isn't readily available. Okay, any other questions? I think we're at the end. I am going to ask you, if there are no more questions, if I could ask you to complete this poll. We're trying to find out how you may have heard about the webinar, because we're working on our advertisement strategies. So if you would do that for us, like Todd said, we'll get the PowerPoint, the reflection rubric, and the archives of all 3 sessions sent out sometime next week.
And I'd like to thank everybody for coming.